Today we're looking at the top 10 most expensive whiskey in the world. Welcome to alux.com, the place where future billionaires come to get inspired. Hello Aluxers, thanks for tuning in. This top 10 list is luxury refinement at its very best. Whiskey is one of the oldest and most revered alcoholic beverages in the world. The word whiskey actually comes from an old Gaelic word meaning life water. From about the 15th century onwards, raw versions of whiskey were brewed and used in medicine to sterilize wounds and sedate patients. Today, whiskey is enjoyed around the world as a fine liquor and is reserved for special occasions. Most of the finest whiskey is known as Scotch whiskey. In order for a whiskey to be Scotch, it must have been brewed in Scotland. In 2017, the U.S. imported around $1 billion of Scotch whiskey. The liquor contributes to around $5 billion of revenue for the UK each year, easily making it the most valuable food or drink product for the British economy. In fact, whiskey alone generates about a quarter of all revenue from food or drink sales. So it's of little surprise that the very best whiskeys are sold with some staggering prices, and most of them originate from Scotland. So if you're inclined, pour yourself a glass and get ready to learn about the top 10 most expensive types of whiskey ever sold. If you're new here, welcome. Be sure to subscribe and follow us on Instagram at Alux. Number 10. Balvenie, a 50-year single malt Scotch whiskey, sold for $50,000. A single malt whiskey is one that is distilled once from a mash of a single type of grain. A 50-year single malt is one that was left in an oak cask after distilling for 50 years. This helps to refine the taste and gives it an unmistakably rich, dark color. The Balvenie 50-year single malt is particularly special because each barrel has followed a secret family recipe for centuries. But wait, there is more. The price tag becomes so high because this particular type of Balvenie whiskey was made in a single barrel. The barrel was able to just about fill 88 bottles in total, so to even see one of these is a rare treat in itself. Tasting it, however, is reserved for those willing to pay an outrageous amount per sip. Number 9. Dalmore Madison, sold for $58,000. The Dalmore 62 was made from a fusion of 4 separate types of single malt whiskey back in 1942. 12 bottles of the blend were produced in total, and each one was hand-blown by skilled artisans way up in the Scottish Highlands. Each bottle has a different shape and is named to commemorate a prominent personality from Dalmore. The most expensive out of all of these 12 bottles was the Dalmore Madison. It was named after Alexander Madison, who was the owner of the Dalmore estate. This bottle was sold to an anonymous buyer. Legend has it that this gentleman of fine tastes and deep pockets immediately cracked open the bottle and shared it with his friends. What a guy! Number 8. W&J Mudders Balmore, 1850. Sold for $68,135. This 168-year-old single malt is the oldest known bottle of Balmore whiskey that still exists. In 2007, it was sold to an anonymous telephone bidder by the McTeers auctioneers in Glasgow. The incredible price tag was far above what experts were estimating it would be before the auction. Indeed, the cork itself had fallen into the bottle. Nonetheless, the fact that this bottle was given to William Mutter, one of the founders of the Balmore distillery back in 1851 and had been passed down through the family ever since, certainly makes it special and unique. The purchase grabbed a lot of media attention at the time and certainly added to its value. Whoever the anonymous telephone bidder was, chances are they're keeping the bottle as a priceless collector's item rather than getting blindly drunk. Number 7. Macallan Really Fine as well as Rare One, sold for $75,000. Macallan is the third largest distiller of Scotch whiskey in the world, behind Glenfiddich and Glenlivet. However, it is renowned as the number 1 in quality. Distilled in the famous Scottish Highland of Speyshere, they have various classy types of whiskey. One of their most expensive and famous blends is the 1926 collection. Aged in charred white oak for 60 years, the batch was finally bottled in 1986. In a patriarchal style that would cause offense to many in today's liberal media, the fine and rare 1926 Macallan was said to be reserved for real men because it was so dry and concentrated. No water was used in the distillation process at all. There were 40 bottles in total, and it's not certain how many remain undrunk today. The last known bottle to be sold was to a South Korean businessman back in 2005. He paid a whopping $75,000 for it. However, there's been no word about it being drank or preserved. Number 6. Glenfiddich Janet Sheed Roberts Reserve, 1955. Sold for $94,000. Janet Sheed Roberts was a truly incredible woman. She was the last living granddaughter of William Grant, who began the Glenfiddich distillery back in 1886. She was one of the first ladies to ever study at the universities of Glasgow and Edinburgh, where she majored in law. She practiced as a lawyer for many years and helped to drive an equality between genders that our society still strives for today. In August 2011, she celebrated her 110th birthday, making her the oldest woman in recorded Scottish history. To commemorate this special lady and her illustrious life, Glenfiddich named a batch of 1955 Reserve after her. 11 bottles were produced in total, 3 of which were sold at auction, while the whereabouts of the others remain unknown. The accumulated sales price of those 3 were in the region of $260,000, and all of the money was donated to charities as Jane Sheed Roberts had requested. The most expensive of these bottles was sold at auction in New York for $94,000. Shortly after this auction, Jane had passed away. As a result, all 11 of these bottle values have increased vastly. None have ever resurfaced on the market, but if they do, they may well break the record and come in at number 1 on this list in the future. So, Aluxers, here we are at the halfway point. If you've been taking a sip for each time you've heard the word whiskey, then you're probably a little tipsy by now. In any case, don't forget to check out some other top 10 lists. Like our list of the top 10 largest landowners in the world. It's particularly interesting and surprising, so why not check it out? Alright, back to this countdown. Number 5. George Washington Distillery Straight Rye Whiskey, sold for $100,000. Could this be the only American whiskey on the list? Surely not, but maybe. Let's not ruin the surprise. We can tell you that it's definitely the only rye whiskey on this list. In any case, this whiskey is particularly special, as the name might imply, because George Washington himself devised the recipe for it over 200 years ago. This extremely special batch was distilled in 2003 and aged in the finest handcrafted American oak casks for 2 years. The very first bottle to be sealed was dubbed and labeled Bottle Number 1. For the first time in history, George Washington's recipe was available for retail. It was sold at auction, and after a fiercely competitive bidding war, Mervyn Shanken, a publisher from New Haven, Connecticut, bought it for $100,000. Being both a cigar and whiskey aficionado, we're guessing he didn't save the bottle as a collector's item. More likely, he found the perfect environment to sit down with a glass in one hand and an extremely expensive cigar in the other. Sophistication personified. Number 4. Glenfiddich It's Rare Collection, sold for $120,000. 61 bottles of this extremely special Glenfiddich single malt were made in total. Distilled in 1937, it was aged for 64 years before being bottled in 2001. This made it the oldest single malt on the market. Glenfiddich sold 60 bottles for an original price of $10,000 each, whilst holding on to the first bottle from the batch. Many of those original 60 were drank and enjoyed by their buyers, while others have appeared in auctions ever since. In 2004, one of the last known bottles was sold for $72,000 and drank almost immediately. This left Glenfiddich with the last known bottle. In 2005, the bottle was sold to Sky Connection for an undisclosed fee. The duty-free company immediately announced it would be on sale at the Cheplak Kok Airport in Hong Kong. It has since been sold for an incredible $120,000. So for those wondering what they could invest their hard-earned cash in, a bottle of rare whiskey certainly isn't a bad shot. Within 6 years, this specific batch increased in value by 1,200%. Number 3. Nuns Island Distillery Pure Pot Still Whiskey, sold for $143,000. The second oldest whiskey on this list, and the only one coming from a distillery no longer in operation, this is more of a historical artifact than a beverage. This whiskey was distilled and produced in Galway by H.S. Percy's Nuns Island Distillery. The distillery shut down in 1908, and this was one of the last bottles ever produced there. On the reverse, there is an incredible note to the buyer. It warns of how many people have been filling Percy whiskey bottles with inferior brands and trying to sell them off for profit. Percy says that he will personally pay anyone £100 if they give information that successfully leads to a prosecution of a fraudster. The bottle itself was brought to the attention of an auctioneer in Galway back in 2005. An old lady bought it in, wrapped in a plastic bag, and asked if it might be worth something. She had no idea she was sitting on an absolute gold mine. The bottle ended up making her $143,000 richer. Number 2. Dalmore 64 Trinitas, sold for $164,000. The kind of product that brings shivers down the spine of anyone that knows anything about quality distillation. This blend contains whiskey distilled in 1868, 1878, 1926, and 1939. The blend was then left to age for 64 years. The last 2 years were spent in a handcrafted American white oak cask, which has been especially prepared by master distiller Richard Patterson. The wood was first soaked in another extremely rare Dalmore whiskey. Then the cask was filled with 2 of the finest sherries ever produced, a Matusalem Oloroso and a Pedro Jimenez. After the sherries were removed, this incredible whiskey was poured in for the last 2 years of slumber. In such a way, a unique and delightful taste was developed. 3 bottles were produced in total, each one handmade and mouth-blown from the finest molten crystal and adorned with silver. This gives the decanter an awe-inspiring presentation. The first 2 bottles have already been sold. The last one is still available at the Whiskey Exchange. You can find it online and register yourself as a potential buyer. Good luck! Number 1. Macallan 64 Year in Lalique, $460,000. This is the oldest single malt whiskey that Macallan has ever sold. It was bottled in an incredible one-off Lalique Cire Perdue. The collaboration came as a part of a global fundraising tour for a charity that is simply called Water. This charity provides clean and safe drinking water to some of the most vulnerable people on the planet. The bottle and its incredibly rare and special contents had been on tours around several cities, including London and Paris, before coming to auction at Sotheby's in New York in 2010. A lively bidding war ensued. In the end, an anonymous philanthropist broke the bank to gasps of all that watched on by bidding an incredible $460,000. It's believed the owner still has the bottle stashed away and has no intention of drinking it. And Alaxers, that's it. What an incredible list. 1 American whiskey, 1 Irish, and 8 Scottish. And now a question posed to you, our esteemed and valued viewers. If you had the money, would you invest and collect bottles of rare whiskey or buy them to enjoy? Let us know in the comments below. And as always, for sticking with us and watching all the way to the end, here's your bonus fact, you loyal Alaxer. The word whiskey is spelled differently by Irish, Scottish, and Canadians. Whiskey can be spelled W-H-I-S-K-Y or W-H-I-S-K-E-Y. Without the E is generally used by the Irish, Scottish, and Canadians. With the E is usually used by distillers from other countries. It's generally suggested that your spelling should correlate to the way it's spelled on the label of whatever whiskey you're discussing. Thank you for spending some time with us, A-Luxer. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss a video. If you want more, we handpicked these videos you might enjoy, or head over to alux.com for the best in fine living content on the planet. Be a part of the largest community of luxury enthusiasts in the world and tell your story.